Okay, thank you, Megan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Um, like Megan said, I am Price Rumbelow, and joining me for the presentation today is Jesus Franco, the Assistant Coordinator for the Rio Grande Joint Venture, and I do the conservation delivery work as the coordinator for the JV. So just kind of jumping in there, I wanted to briefly go over what a migratory bird joint venture is. So migratory bird joint ventures were established in the 80s. They were initially established around the decline of waterfowl, so ducks and geese and birds that use those kind of more watery environments. Um, the success of that program led to the establishment through a congressional act for Fish and Wildlife Service funding for a portion of the joint ventures. And joint ventures grew out to be all bird, and now there's a joint venture that covers everywhere in the United States as well as into Canada and Mexico. So they're voluntary, collaborative, regionally focused partnerships, self-directed and non-regulatory. So that means that, we don't have the regulatory statute within our mission, and we are self-directed. So even though there is that influx of money from Fish and Wildlife Service that kind of goes into our base operating funds, we direct where our conservation implementation needs to be done and what strategies need to be done within our geographies. Um, this helps implement a national, international bird conservation plans, but also focused in on the areas and the geographies that are represented by each joint venture. And so we really help to kind of be that bridge between private, state, and federal agencies. And to kind of an example of that, we zoom in here on the 5 joint ventures that are within the state of Texas, and the way that those are made up a little bit. So just to kind of talk about that, you can see that the Lower Mississippi Valley joint venture and the Gulf Coast joint venture, these are both their coordinator. Is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service employee. Um, for Playa Lakes joint venture, they are actually a 501(c)(3). They're their own standalone entity. And for the American Bird Conservancy is actually our financier. So we're hosted by them at Rio Grande Joint Venture, and Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture is also that. So in set up like that. So it can look a little bit different, the way that these are established, the way that these are managed, but ultimately everybody is working together to do good bird habitat restoration, and just recognizing that good habitat stewardship and good habitat restoration is good bird habitat restoration. To that end, the joint ventures have been very successful. If you look at kind of a 1999 to 2024 snapshot and you add up all of the federal and non-federal match, for every $1 invested by the U.S. government under that line item, uh, we've been able to leverage that to $41 of match. So if you just take 1 year out of that, 2024, Congress approved $17 million for the joint venture budget that goes across all joint ventures in the US. And then we brought to the table $665 million worth of match. About 19% of that came from the state of Texas. And I mentioned earlier it's all bird focus. You can see that the initial birds, though, the wetland birds, those waterfowl, it's kind of interesting here to note that there was this low numbers, right? And then if you look towards the right hand side of that graph, we really increased those numbers, and it's been a very successful thing. Now, the rest of the birds falling off, and one bird clade that we're very concerned with and that we spend a lot of our time talking about are the grassland birds and the land birds, which you see are definitely in need of help. I'm going to hand it over to Jesus now. He's going to talk a little bit more about our scope of work.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Megan. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to talk to you today about joint ventures and what we do here in Texas in the Rio Grande joint venture. And so you might recall the two maps that Price showed, uh, where you can see the network of joint ventures across North America. Out of 25 joint ventures, we're one of them, Rio Grande joint venture, and we are one of three binational joint ventures. Everybody else is fully within the US or fully within Canada. So what you see there on the left is the scope of our geography. And as you can see, the bulk of the area where we work is in Mexico. 8 states in Mexico, Texas in the US, West Texas and South Texas. One thing that is important to note here is that joint ventures are, for the most part, aligned along uh, ecoregions. They don't really follow state lines, county lines, not even country lines, but they follow, for the most part, ecoregional lines. And so for the Rio Grande joint venture, we work primarily in 3 ecoregions. The map on the right there, you can see the light yellow polygon, that's the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion. The orange polygon to the right of it is the Tamaulipan Brushlands ecoregion. And then the other ecoregion where we work is that tiny greenish teal blue color, which corresponds to the Mexican portion of the Gulf Coastal Plain ecoregion. That's basically the Laguna Madre de Tamaulipas. Next. So within those 3 ecoregions where we work, through expert opinion and partnership with all the folks that we work with, either NGOs, government, academia, etc., we define priority habitats. These ecoregions are much too big to try to cover every habitat within them, and so we prioritize. So for Chihuahuan Desert, our main priority habitat is grasslands, as Price mentioned, uh, along with riparian corridors and wetlands. Tamaulipan Brushlands ecoregion, uh, about the same. Grassland-dominated habitats is our main focus, along with riparian corridors. And then on the Mexican portion of the Gold Coast Prairie or the Laguna Madre, all the coastal habitats that have an impact on the populations of birds is what we work with. Next. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the conservation delivery programs that we have going on in Texas, in the Rio Grande joint venture. Something that is important to mention too is that joint ventures, in general, one of the main focus is conservation delivery on the ground. The main goal is to improve the habitat conditions for the declining species of birds that we want to help. So that delivery is a conservation is a major goal. For South Texas, we have the South Texas Grassland Restoration Incentive Program. And credit where credit is due, the GRIP model, conservation model, was first developed by our partners at the Oxen Prairies joint venture. Um, they run up and down Central Texas and into Oklahoma. This was a program that was very successful for them, and we took a good look at it and brought it to South Texas, adapted it to the local conditions, and so far it's been very successful. The main goal of this program is to partner with private landowners in the implementation of best management practices that are conducive to the enhancement of native grasslands. We want to increase the quality, the quantity, the connectivity of native grasslands in the Tamaulipan brushlands ecoregion. Why are we doing this? And this is because over the last century or so, through different practices, activities in South Texas, the quality of those native grasslands in South Texas has declined due to many of the reasons that we all know about. Improper grazing management, both overgrazing and undergrazing in some cases, uh, fire that is no longer a key component of the native grassland ecosystems in South Texas, land use change, conversion of native grasslands to croplands, and development of different kinds, urban energy and others, and then the proliferation of non-native grasses and also brush encroachment, which is usually the result of any one of these conditions and or a combination of all of the above. Next. This is a really busy slide. I won't bother you with all the details, but I'll just tell you that this is the key to why we have this conservation and restoration plan for grasslands in South Texas. With the decline of those native grasslands, we have detected, documented a decline in grassland bird species. So things like eastern meadowlark, northern bobwhite, and Cassin sparrow, along with other species, have declined significantly over the last 25 years. This is 10 years ago at the beginning of the program. And so we crunched the numbers and we figured that in order to help reverse those declining population trends for those species, we needed to put an additional 2 million acres of improved grassland habitat back on the South Texas landscape. Next. So we got busy, with that goal in mind, 2 million acres of improved grassland habitat, and started partnering with private landowners in this ecoregion. And this is nothing new for many of us, all of us. These are some of the main practices that we're implementing on private land in order to try to reverse the condition of degraded grasslands back into more functional grasslands. No surprise, heat brush management is one of the main practices that we're implementing, both mechanical and chemical. Prescribed fire is one, as I mentioned, element that was removed from the ecosystem, and so we're trying to bring it back and trying to work with landowners on finding ways to remove some of the perceived concerns and real concerns about prescribed fire as just as a very effective and very economical way to restore a degraded grassland. Prescribed grazing, something that is important to highlight is that all of this work, for the most part, is happening on working lands in South Texas. So we need to work hand in hand with the landowners, helping them meet the bottom line as well as looking out for improving the ecological conditions for the birds that we're trying to help. And also range planting. That means using mixes of native seeds to jumpstart the restoration of some of those degraded grasslands. Next. So these are the accomplishments to date after 8 years now of working with landowners in South Texas. We have almost 31,000 acres enrolled in improved grassland management. We have invested $1.2 million or so as an economic incentive for those landowners to be able to implement these practices. The program has a one-to-one match requirement. And we're very happy to see that the landowner is more than willing to come up with not only that one-to-one match requirement, but more than that. And so this far, we have been able to get landowners to contribute almost $2 million to the practices, to the program. And so that's almost a 1-to-2 match, which, it's great given the fact that the basic requirement is 1-to-1. The average cost per acre to our program is $42, which is really cheap, considering that brush management in particular is one of the most expensive practices that you can implement here in South Texas. Next. And just to show you a little bit of a breakdown of how those practices lined up, almost 50%, 48% of what we're doing is prescribed grazing, almost 15,000 acres. And then the rest is brush control for the most part, for 40%, along with a small portion of prescribed fire and ranch planting. As I mentioned, we're trying hard to implement more prescribed fire on the landscape here in South Texas, but it's something that we just need to keep working on. Next. And so after the big yellow machines go in and do the thing, and we lit the fire and prescribed burn is finished, there's an opportunity to celebrate and high five and everything. But one thing that is important for us in joint ventures in general is to know what happened after the practices were implemented. And so that is done through uh, monitoring and research. So we had been able to um, secure funding and capacity to be able to go back to those treatment areas and find out through specific monitoring protocols how the vegetation is responding to the practices that were implemented, as well as how are the bird populations responding to those practices. This is really a lot of work, and we're still crunching the numbers, but we're very optimistic that we are on the right path in terms of moving the conservation needle for the populations of birds. Next. It is important to mention that the South Texas GRIP is a partnership conservation model. There are different partners that have come together to make all of this possible. So we have our funding partners. These are the ones that provide the money to make uh, the engine work to run the program. We have our administrative partners that help us, manage those funds, grants, contracts, agreements, all of that. And we also have partners that help us with the implementation, on-the-ground implementation of the programs. And so, very quickly, I'll say that NIFWIF, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and Fish and Wildlife Service are providers of the funding, some of the funding that we use for the program. And partners like NRCS, Quail Forever, and the Cesar Claver Wildlife Research Institute have helped us with the delivery of the program. But of course, the most important partner in all of this is the private landowner, because without them, we would not be able to run the program and see the results that we're trying to achieve. And in the process, we're also helping as much as we can the landowner meet their bottom lines by improving the productivity of their habitats on their properties, and of course their livestock raising operation if there is one. Next. That's all I have as far as the South Texas GRIP program. I'm going to turn it back to Price to talk about what we're doing in the Chihuahuan Desert.
Yeah, thank you, Jesus. And I think that was a really good summary of what y'all are working on down there. Thank you too for pointing out the key role that partnerships play within the joint ventures. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but we are partnership driven. It's evidenced by our board, which consists of federal, state industry, landowner, and NGOs in both US and Mexico, which help guide us in setting the priorities that we're going after within our geography. Um, You can imagine, I think Jesus alluded to it earlier, the state of Texas is very large and very different in terms of ecosystem types, and we don't try to, write a prescription that fits for the entire Rio Grande joint venture geography. The way that we handle it, we have an office in Alpine, and we have an office down there where Jesus is at in McAllen. I work out of the Alpine office, and a lot of the work that I do is based here in the Chihuahuan Desert, and so we kind of loosely term that the Chihuahuan Desert Habitat Program. We work on a lot of different initiatives though within the area. I've listed three here: the Trans-Pecos Grassland and Riparian Initiative, the Alameda Creek Conservation Initiative, and the Pecos Watershed Conservation Initiative. Um, those are just examples. We work a little bit outside of those as well, but you can see that we really have this emphasis on connecting the uplands to the riparians and acknowledging the importance of good stewardship at that watershed level. And so, kind of going forward on that theme, watershed health begins with grasslands. So the area of lands that drain into a specific water body is its watershed, but we like to think of that as a water catchment area. So good upland habitat and keeping those areas in good condition allows them to retain and build topsoil, and the reverse of that is true as well. So you can see by this photo here, as the water is landing on that left-hand side of the photo, it's going to shed off of that a lot faster, taking topsoil with it, and then that's going to cause downstream problems as well with increased gullying or increased sediment deposition. But if we can keep that water up on the uplands, slow it down, increase infiltration, then you not only have a stronger ecological return in your grasslands, but you also can affect those downstream situations as well. Also, it matters just because large intact grasslands are in record decline across the United States. To that end, we've joined up with a number of joint ventures all the way from Mexico to Canada. This subset of joint ventures that work within the United States is called the JV8. You can find out more about them online, and this grassland decline across. But it's not just bird species that benefit from habitat restoration. Pronghorn antelope are a very charismatic species that also need these wide open grasslands. And so we've been very successful, in particular with the Trans-Pecos Grassland and Riparian Conservation Initiative, in partnering with the State Wildlife Agency and with Borderlands Research Institute to work on these habitat restoration projects, as well as targeting some of these landowners that are in prime habitat to do fence modifications. And so that doesn't really apply to the grassland bird use, but you can imagine that the benefit to pronghorn is pretty substantial, allowing for that movement across these now intact grasslands that we've created behind us. Working in the grasslands, we typically focus on invasive woody plant management. We've done some soil surface manipulation as well, along with our invasive woody plant management. And we've helped our landowners when they're coming up with these more adaptive grazing strategies, which allows them flexibility within their operation. So being that our landowners is our biggest partner, what does that mean? Really what it means is that when we go to a landowner visit, we like to go and listen as much as we talk. Sometimes the landowners come to us with a a project that they already have in mind that they might need assistance with or some technical guidance with. Or maybe it's just an idea that they would like to kind of flesh out with us. The soil surface manipulation stuff in particular has been interesting. We've worked with two private landowners out here to do a combination of soil surface manipulation. So in the picture here, we have a dozer with some chiseling implements on the back. So we were opening up that soil surface and allowing sheet wash to really infiltrate. Um, Now, they've done this practice before on their property, but the spike application typically, there's a lag time there where after you have spike on the ground, you really don't want to do any chiseling. What we were able to do was help fund a chiseling project prior to a spike project, but in concert with it. So that way, as soon as this chiseling was wrapped up, we got spike out on the ground, and we were in a really good place to accept the monsoon rains as they came. We had some kill off from the creosote from some winter rain and precip events. It just worked out timing wise really nicely. And then the flush of grasses that came in to those chisel strips was huge, and that was really successful in terms of initial population of those chiseling strips. Now, primarily biannual grasses, but we hope to see those kind of transition into more perennial grasses over time. And that's something that our monitoring has really helped us kind of keep track of. Another picture here I wanted to really point out was the covered pila or covered tank that you see photographed next to these gentlemen. Bildo there is actually on our board. He's a rancher out of Durango. He's doing really great stuff with rotational grazing, and that's what that picture is. Next to that is a West Texas ranch that we recently helped replace open pilas with these covered pilas, and so some of these more adaptive grazing strategies really require water to be spread out across the landscape. And one thing that we found here in West Texas was that with evaporative loss greater than 80 inches at this site, they were losing maybe 60,000 gallons of water just through evaporation. That doesn't even take into account just the age of the infrastructure and maybe leaking pilas, which is certainly happening as well. So we replaced this with a covered pila, helped the landowner do that. And the downstream effect of that was much cleaner water in his lines going to his troughs and everything. So he wasn't having to pay as much for pump repair, where this gets picked up and moved. This was just kind of one example of listening to landowners and meeting them where their needs are, and then really trying to help facilitate things that lead to these improvements of large scale habitat. So watershed restoration, after we've gotten the grasses right, everything needs water, and erosion leads to soil loss. It can take maybe 1,000 years to put that 1 inch back after you've lost it. So keeping it there is much better. An ounce of prevention, versus a pound of the cure. But we really look at process-based restoration. So we interrupt those negative feedback loops, those negative cycles, and place into the system something that can allow for these positive feedback loops. And so pictured here is just a small little moment where we put in some rocks across a area that was beginning to show signs of erosion and gullying, and you can see that the soil was captured there, and you had this flush of grasses behind it. So taking that watershed level approach even further is that the Alameda Creek Conservation Initiative is one that I wanted to highlight here. We looked at the entire watershed of the Alameda Creek. We joined up in partnership with the Dixon Water Foundation, the Horizon Foundation, and Borderlands Research Institute to do conservation delivery on the watershed level scale. We've reached out to landowners, we've held workshops, we've invited them to collaborate, and we've done grassland restoration projects, in-stream structure projects, and we've let those all build off of each other. And we think that this is a really good model for focusing efforts and focusing restoration dollars where they can build off of one another. So what does a functioning channel look like? We've talked a little bit more about the grasslands. I'm kind of going down the watershed right now. And so a functioning channel allows for connection to the floodplains, and a non-functioning channel, typically, at least out here in the arid lands of West Texas, begins to have too much water in too short of a time. So what we're often really trying to do on uplands and in these riparian areas is slow down the rate that the water comes through and spread it out and let that sink into the riparian aquifer. Now, studies have shown that your downstream user don't actually get decreased water from these methodologies. They'll still get the same amount of water, but what they'll get is a water over a longer time period, which we think is a much better approach, much more usable for our plants and for the response to the habitat and then wildlife. And so you can just see kind of with this crude drawing here, the functioning versus non-functioning. But again, if that water comes off in a sheet in a big rush, it gets into the channel in the non-functioning image. It doesn't have any ability to get up and onto the floodplain. And so all the energy is confined within the banks of the creek. And that leads to that down cutting. And so that becomes kind of a negative feedback loop. So if you can interrupt that and you can slow down that water and start to grade your bottom instead of decreasing or degrading your channel bottom, you can reconnect to the floodplain, which allows for dissipation of that energy and also a slowing and a spreading and a sinking. And so you actually will create that kind of positive feedback loop where now you have woody materials, now you have vegetative materials that are breaking up that soil, that are allowing more infiltration, that are shedding dead materials, which are allowing more slowing of the streams. Some of the different practices we use in the stream channels. This is a really cool image that was put together in a Laura Norman paper. But you can see there's a number of different strategies that we've employed: leaky weirs, trincheras, rock dams. You see that there are beaver dam analogs or log dams, gabion baskets here, which are kind of in a bigger channel. So you can take these little bites. I encourage little bites, because you take these little bites, often with these structures that are designed to have, they're leaky, they're not trying to hold back the world, so we're not trying to engineer dams, to hold all the water back. These just are little moments that allow that water to slow up, grade, spread out, and sink, and we've seen real success in the vegetative response and the bird use around those vegetative habitat responses. Over on the right is actually some of our site photos from some brush weirs and rock weirs. And in the rock weir photo in particular, you're looking upstream here. And so you can see there that there was about 1.5 feet of material deposited upstream behind that rock weir. And what was really startling about that is that happened in 2 days. So we finished this up, and the rain came just as we were finishing the project and we were moving the equipment out of there. It was following a long dry period. we've had record-setting drought. You're all familiar with that, and so getting these structures in place became just came kind of just in time. So as the water came, the soils on the uplands were really primed to shed water quickly. They were not wetted. They had been dry, and so and there was a lot of bare ground because there wasn't much vegetative response because the last years had also been dry. So it was shedding a lot of topsoil. We caught that topsoil in the channel and we raised it by 1.5 feet. And you think if you shot a laser from the top of that back up the stream channel, what's the cubic dimensions of soil that you were able to catch? It's pretty cool. So there's a lot of benefits to mitigation. It interrupts those processes that lead to degraded sites, and I think that's the one thing I really want to emphasize here is that interrupting those negative processes with processes that create positive feedback loops, really gets the most bang for your buck, and it leads to these long-term restorations of the site. Um, with that comes benefits like increases in vegetation and in the diversity of vegetation. So you only have certain plants that can utilize maybe those drier upland sites. But once you allow these soils to rehydrate, you start to get that mix of vegetative, especially right here along this channel photographed here. We're actually trying to restore a riparian cottonwood gallery forest alongside of a creek. And this is near to the town of Fort Davis. So those cottonwoods would have been, cut down over time to facilitate, the fort and then later the town. Now we're kind of using natural gas or electricity to heat our homes. The utilization of those trees has fallen off, and we're in a place that we can start to restore that riparian canopy, producing good habitats for things like black hawks and uh, even roosting turkeys, quail. There's a lot of species that are going to benefit from that healthy riparian corridor. Overall, this leads to improved soil health and more resilient and functioning landscapes. So that's kind of it for today. That's what we're so thankful for y'all to all come and listen to us talk. Please, we have time for questions. If you have any, put them in the chat, or I guess that's how Megan's asking for it. But also, um, we can share our contact information with y'all, and feel free to reach out if you're a landowner that's within our geography. We'd be happy to talk with you and discuss what are the goals that you have for your property. And if you're a landowner outside of our geography, just remember that there are those 5 joint ventures in Texas. Wherever you're at in the state, there is a joint venture that you're within their geography, and we're all here to help with that technical guidance and sometimes financial assistance for these habitat restoration projects. So thank you.
Thank you, Price. Thank you, Jesus. I don't see any questions that have popped up, which means y'all did a very thorough job. Lots of thank yous coming up in the chat though. So well done with the presentation. I have a it might be kind of an off the wall question. And you guys may not deal with this a whole bunch, but with the more recent pressure on the border wall topic, do y'all have to filter any landowner questions or concerns, being that you work along the border with border wall construction? I know there's been a lot of talk in Big Bend about increasing building of a border wall. So I guess maybe Price, you may have dealt with it a little bit more recently. Do y'all, like I said, filter any questions through with landowners that you work with regards to that and the bird species that you work with the joint venture?
We've been monitoring the situation closely. It's affecting the community members, greatly, and where we work and who we work with. We have landowners that We've helped get in touch with other landowners so that they can be more informed about what's happening within their reach. And ultimately, for the impact to birds, it kind of remains to be seen what the final footprint of that construction will be. We have a pretty active mapping team, and so keeping track of those changes to that infrastructural footprint over time,
Okay.
seeing where that's going to be, and then we can kind of start to think about, impacts to the bird life.
Okay. There was a question from Karen in the chat. How are landowners responding to the stream practices that you just finished talking about towards the end of your presentation?
It's been really encouraging to see them become more adopted. Also, it's one thing to talk about, and it's another thing to see it. And so I think as more of these get out onto the landscape, we've seen more response in favor of them. And so, that's been the challenge in some ways, has been getting, that initial landowner cooperation within the projects. But yeah, it really is telling when you get an event like that. In that case, it was the landowner was pretty much sold. You can imagine they're sitting there looking at that 1.5 foot of gain in soil, and so they're saying, where can I put in more? How can we do more? The state of Texas has adopted the EQIP practices that will help fund these through the NRCS as well. And so that's really going to be big as those start to go out through other sources too. So the Hill Country Alliance has been big on promoting these practices. Yeah, I think the word's getting out.
Another question just popped up. Are state parks in your region like Devil's River or Big Bend Ranch State Park and Seminole Canyon utilizing these practices as well?
Good question. I spent 5 years with state parks in the Natural Resources Office. I've been in contact with them. We have some sites picked out to do some more work on installing these with maybe volunteer groups and as part of their program. So I'd say more to come on those, within the parks out here. But yeah, good. They're definitely one of our partners.